The year is 1985. The air in the Miller family barn is thick with the smell of old oil. Dust motes dance in the slanted afternoon light. A young engineer from Des Moines runs his hand over a piece of steel. It is a 3-point hitch, welded to the back of a John Deere Model A tractor, a tractor that is 45 years old. The engineer's name is David. He is 26 years old. He has a degree from Iowa State. He has seen hundreds of hitches, factory-made, aftermarket kits, custom fabrications. But he has never seen one like this. The welds are utilitarian, not beautiful. They are thick. They are strong. They look like they were laid down by someone who cared more about permanence than aesthetics. The design is simple. It is brutally efficient. It uses a single hydraulic cylinder scavenged from something else. David traces a line with his finger. He turns to the man beside him, Frank Gable, retired. For 30 years, Frank owned the John Deere dealership in town.
He sold the Millers this very tractor. Or rather, he sold it to Thomas Miller's father, a lifetime ago.
The engineer, David, speaks quietly. This design, it shouldn't work this well on a Model A. The geometry is all wrong according to our specs. The stress on the transmission housing should have cracked it 20 years ago. Frank Gable says nothing. He just looks at the hitch. He has seen it from a distance for 2 decades, driving past the Miller farm, seeing it in the fields. He never got this close, never wanted to. The engineer continues. It's the way she distributed the load across the drawbar support. It's brilliant. Who came up with this? He asks the question to the small group. Thomas Miller stands beside his wife, Evelyn. Thomas's left arm is gone, lost to a corn picker in '61. His right arm is strong. It rests on his wife's shoulder. Evelyn Miller steps forward. She is a grandmother now. Her hands are curled with arthritis, but they are steady. She looks at the young engineer. Her voice is clear. I did. A silence hangs in the barn. The engineer looks from her to the hitch and then to Frank Gable. Frank? You told our regional man this conversion was impossible, that you refused to sell the parts for it. Frank Gable looks at the floor. He looks at Thomas's empty sleeve. He looks at Evelyn's hands. He remembers a day in 1962, a conversation, a refusal delivered with kindness, a certainty that he was doing the right thing. The gap between that day and this one is 23 years wide. It is filled with harvests and land purchases and a quiet, unyielding success that he witnessed from the other side of a fence line. This story is about that gap. It's about the difference between what someone tells you is possible and what you make possible with your own 2 hands. This channel tells the stories of people who were counted out, people who were told no, people who answered not with words, but with work. If you believe those stories need to be told, subscribe. Because the story of Evelyn Miller is the story of a quiet fight, the loneliest fight there is. Proving someone wrong who genuinely believes they are helping you. Let's go back to 1961, the year of the accident. Thomas Miller was strong. He could lift a hay bale in each arm. He could work from sunup to sundown. The farm was small, 80 acres, left to him by his father. It was a good life, but it was hard. The equipment was old. The margins were thin. Then came the corn picker. A moment of exhaustion, a sleeve caught in the rollers. That was it. The doctor in town saved his life. He could not save his arm. The farm community rallied. Neighbors helped with the harvest. The church brought casseroles. There was kindness everywhere. But winter came. The help went home to their own farms. And the reality set in. How does a one-armed man run a farm? How do you lift the cultivator on an old Model A with one arm? The manual lift lever required 2 hands and a strong back. Thomas had 1 hand, and his back was broken with grief. Evelyn watched him. She saw the light go out of his eyes. He would sit at the kitchen table, staring out at the fields he could no longer work. He said to her one night, "We'll have to sell. There's no other way." Evelyn had married into this farm. She was a town girl, a librarian's daughter, but she had learned the rhythms of the land. She had learned the language of the machines. She knew the sound a bearing made just before it failed. She knew the smell of an engine running too hot. She read tractor manuals like they were novels. She had a mind for mechanics, a mind for systems. She saw the problem not as an ending, but as an engineering challenge. She said to Thomas, "No, we are not selling." She had an idea. The newer tractors had it. A 3-point hitch, a hydraulic system that lifted implements with the touch of a lever. It was the answer. It would allow Thomas to farm again. It would make him whole in the only way that mattered. She found a catalog. An aftermarket company sold a conversion kit. It wasn't cheap. It would take nearly all their savings, but it was cheaper than quitting. They decided together. They would do it. They would make it work. The next Saturday, they drove into town. They walked into the John Deere dealership. The bell over the door chimed. Frank Gable came out from the back office. Frank was a good man. He was on the school board. He coached Little League. He knew everyone in the county. He smiled when he saw them. A warm, genuine smile. "Tom, Evie, good to see you." He looked at Thomas's arm. His smile softened with pity. "I heard about the accident. Terrible thing. Anything I can do, you just let me know." Thomas nodded. He was a man of few words. "That's why we're here, Frank. We need to order a part." Evelyn held up the catalog. She had the page marked. She pointed to the 3-point hitch conversion kit. Frank took the catalog. He looked at the picture. He looked at the part number. Then he looked at Thomas. He did not look at Evelyn. He spoke to Thomas, man to man. "Tom, what are you thinking? This old Model A of yours, it wasn't designed for this. The transmission housing is cast iron. You put the stress of a 3-point hitch on it, it'll crack wide open. I've seen it happen." Evelyn started to speak. "The manual says with the reinforcement bracket." Frank held up a hand. He was still looking at Thomas. His voice was kind. It was patient. The voice of a man who has seen it all. "Son, I've been selling these tractors since before you were born. I know what they can and can't do. This kit, it's tricky to install. You need special tools. You need to know what you're doing. It's not a job for—" He paused. He looked at Thomas's empty sleeve again. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Thomas's face hardened. "I can still turn a wrench, Frank." Frank put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "I know you can, Tom. I know you can. But this is a 2-man job, and it's dangerous if it's not done right. I'm not going to be the man who sells you something that gets you hurt again, or worse." He closed the catalog. He pushed it back across the counter. His decision was made. It came from a place of genuine concern, a place that sounded reasonable, a place that sounded right. He said, "The best thing you can do, Tom, is hire a hand, or lease out your acres for a few years. Give yourself time to heal." Evelyn stood there. She was invisible. Her knowledge meant nothing. Her presence was an inconvenience. She spoke again. Her voice was tight. "I can do the installation. I've studied the diagrams." For the first time, Frank Gable looked directly at her. He saw a woman, a farmer's wife, someone who should be in a kitchen, not in a workshop. He smiled a small, tired smile, and then he turned back to her husband.
He delivered the line that would echo for decades, the line that would fuel a quiet, cold fire. Tom. I know this is hard on her too, but a woman's place isn't under a tractor. You need to keep her home, keep her safe. Let the men handle this. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who thought they were protecting you. Someone who smiled while they dismissed you. Someone who saw your dream as a danger to be managed. What do you do with that? You can't fight it with anger. It slides right off. You can't argue with it because it believes it is right and reasonable and kind. Tell me about a time that happened to you. Drop it in the comments below. Because what Evelyn Miller did next is a lesson in how to answer the doubters. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She built. The drive home was silent. The 15 miles felt like 1,000. Thomas stared straight ahead. His jaw was set. He was defeated. The kindness had done what cruelty never could. It had convinced him he was helpless. Evelyn stared out the passenger window. The fields blurred past. She saw the bare trees of winter, the frozen ground. She felt a coldness inside her that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold fury of being erased. They pulled into their yard. Thomas turned off the truck. He sat there for a long moment. He finally turned to her. His voice was quiet. "He's right, Evie. It's too much. We should just sell the farm." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She got out of the truck. She walked to the edge of the barn. She put her hand on the weathered wood. She could feel the history in it. Thomas's grandfather had built this barn with his own 2 hands. She looked at the house. She looked at the fields sleeping under the winter sky. This was their home. It was more than land. It was memory. It was future. She turned back to Thomas. She walked over to his side of the truck. She looked him in the eye. "No, he's wrong." That's all she said. Then she walked into the barn. She pulled the big sliding door shut. The sound echoed in the cold air. Thomas's father, old John Miller, was sitting on the porch. He'd been watching. He was 75. His hands were gnarled, but his eyes were sharp. He had seen the whole story on their faces when they pulled in. He had known Frank Gable for 40 years. He knew exactly what Frank was. A good man. A certain man. And certainty, John knew, was a dangerous thing. He watched Evelyn disappear into the barn. He nodded to himself. He pushed himself up out of his chair and walked to the barn door. He didn't go in. He just slid it open a crack. He could see her inside. She had turned on the single bare bulb that hung from the rafters. She was standing in the middle of the workshop, looking at the tools on the wall, looking at the old arc welder in the corner. John spoke through the crack in the door. His voice was a low rumble. "The steel remembers, Evie. Show them." Then he slid the door shut and went back to the house. Inside the barn, Evelyn took a deep breath. The smell of cold steel and old gasoline filled her lungs. It was the smell of work, the smell of possibility. She wasn't a farmer's wife tonight. She was a fabricator. She was an engineer. She was a rebel. She pulled out a small, grease-stained notebook from her pocket. It was filled with sketches, diagrams of engines, ideas for modifications, things she thought about late at night. She flipped to a clean page. She began to draw. She didn't draw the kit from the catalog. That was someone else's solution. Frank Gable had denied her that. So she would make her own, a better one. She knew the weak point Frank had mentioned, the cast iron transmission housing. The catalog kit used a single heavy bracket. It concentrated all the force in one place. Her design would be different. She drew a frame, a subframe that would attach to the tractor's axles.
and to the drawbar support. It would spread the load. It would cradle the old tractor's frame. It would make it stronger. She drew for an hour, calculating angles, thinking about stress and leverage. Then she put the pencil down. It was time to build. She walked to the scrap pile behind the barn. It was a collection of metal that all farmers keep. Old plowshares, bent rims, broken pieces of machinery. To most people, it was junk. To Evelyn, it was a library of materials. She found a length of heavy channel iron from a collapsed shed, perfect for the main arms. She found a thick steel plate that had once been a loading ramp. That would be the mounting bracket. She dragged the pieces into the barn. The metal screeched against the concrete floor. The sound was like a declaration of war. She pulled out her father-in-law's welder, an old Lincoln arc welder, the size of a small refrigerator. She put on the heavy leather gloves. She pulled the welding helmet over her face. The world narrowed to a small, dark rectangle. She struck an arc. A sudden, violent flash of blue-white light filled the barn. A loud hiss and crackle broke the silence. The smell of ozone filled the air. She laid her first bead. It was not pretty. It was functional. It was strong. She worked all night. Thomas came to the door once. He saw her silhouetted against the welding flashes, a figure of fire and shadow. He didn't say a word. He just went back to the house and made a pot of coffee. He brought it out to her at midnight. He set it on a workbench. She lifted her helmet. Her face was smudged with soot. Her eyes were tired but alive, burning with a light he hadn't seen in months. He just nodded. And for the first time since the accident, he felt a flicker of hope. She cut. She ground. She welded. She measured twice, 3 times. She fit the pieces together, tacking them in place, checking the angles, making sure everything was square. She found an old hydraulic cylinder from a junked haybine. It was rusty, but the shaft was true. She took it apart, cleaned it, replaced the seals. It would be the heart of the machine, the muscle. As the sun began to rise, she was finished. She laid down her last weld. She turned off the machine. The sudden silence was deafening. She lifted her helmet. She looked at her creation. It was not elegant. It was massive, overbuilt. A brutalist piece of farm equipment bolted to the back of the old green tractor. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was a statement. It was an answer. She was exhausted. Her arms ached. Her eyes burned. But she was not tired. She walked to the house. She woke Thomas. "It's done. Let's go see it work." The community noticed. You can't hide something like that in a small town. The next morning, their neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, stopped his truck. He walked over to the barn where they were hooking up a 2-bottom plow. He was a farmer of the old school. He looked at the hitch. He walked around it. He kicked the tires of the tractor. He looked at Evelyn, then at Thomas. He spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Well, I'll be." He looked at the welds. "Frank Gable told you it couldn't be done, didn't he?" Thomas nodded. Abernathy grunted. "Frank's a good man, but he thinks inside the parts catalog. Some problems ain't in the catalog." He pointed at a pin Evelyn had used. "That's a grade 5 bolt. You need grade 8 there, or it'll shear off." He turned and walked back to his truck. He came back a minute later with a handful of thick, hardened steel pins. "Machined them myself from my own baler. Got spares. Use these." Evelyn took them. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy." He just waved a hand. "My wife once fixed our well pump with a hairpin and some baling wire. Never underestimate a woman with a job to do. He was an ally, but there were others, the doubters. They'd gather at the co-op for coffee. Did you see what the Millers welded to that old A? Gonna rip the rear end clean off. It's not safe.
A woman's got no business welding something like that. She's going to get Tom killed. The criticism was always framed as concern, just like Frank's had been. A softer, more insidious kind of poison. Evelyn heard the whispers. She ignored them. She had work to do. Thomas got on the tractor. For the first time in months, he sat in the seat and felt like a farmer. He started the engine. The old two-cylinder popped and hissed to life. Evelyn showed him the lever for the hydraulics. He pushed it. With a smooth, powerful whoosh, the heavy plow lifted off the ground, effortlessly. Thomas looked at Evelyn. A smile spread across his face, a real smile. He drove out to the field. He lowered the plow. The steel blades bit into the dark soil. The old John Deere dug in. It pulled a straight, clean furrow. At the end of the row, he pulled the lever. The plow lifted. He made the turn with one hand on the wheel. He lined up for the next pass. He was farming again. Evelyn stood at the edge of the field. She watched him. One arm, one tractor, one wife who refused to be told no. The dirt is enough, her father-in-law had always said. They took everything but the dirt. The dirt is enough. She knew now what he meant. The capability was in the soil. It was in their hands. It could not be taken away by a parts dealer, or by a corn picker, or by the quiet certainty of dismissive men. Let me tell you about the next few years, because this is where the story becomes bigger than one woman and one tractor. It becomes about the slow, undeniable mathematics of being right. That first year, 1962, their corn yield went up 15%, because Thomas could plow deeper. He could cultivate more precisely. He could work longer hours without exhaustion. They made a small profit, for the first time in years. They didn't buy a new truck. They didn't fix the porch. They saved it. Every dollar. In 1965, the Abernathy farm next door went up for sale. Old man Abernathy had passed. His kids lived in the city. They wanted out. 40 acres. Good bottomland. Frank Gable, at the dealership, heard about it. He thought of the Millers. He felt a pang of something. Pity? Guilt? He wasn't sure. He thought, they'll never be able to afford that. Too bad. 2 weeks later, the deal was done. Thomas and Evelyn Miller bought the 40 acres. The talk at the co-op was about the bank loan they must have gotten. But there was no loan. They walked into the county courthouse with a cashier's check. Cash. Money they had earned. Money they had saved. The first purchase. Frank Gable drove past their farm that fall. He saw Thomas on the old Model A, plowing the new 40, the monstrous homemade hitch gleaming in the sun. Frank felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was a quiet, creeping sense of being wrong, and he didn't like it. By 1970, the farm was 200 acres. They had bought another 80 from a retiring farmer. Cash. The old Model A was still the main tractor. Evelyn had tinkered with it. She had overhauled the engine. She had modified the carburetor to make it more efficient. She designed and built a custom planter attachment. It allowed Thomas to plant seeds with more accurate spacing. Using the same hydraulic system she had built, their yields were now among the best in the county. People stopped whispering. They started watching.
They started asking questions. A young farmer stopped by one day. He had an old tractor like theirs. He asked Evelyn if she would build a hitch for him. She thought about it. She said no. "But I will teach you how." She spent a week with him in his workshop. She showed him her design. She taught him how to weld, how to measure, how to see the solution that wasn't in the catalog. Soon there were 3, then 4, then a half-dozen Miller hitches on farms around the county. They were a quiet testament, a small steel rebellion. In 1975, they finally bought a new tractor, a big John Deere 4430 with a factory-installed 3-point hitch. They paid for it with a single check, cash. Frank Gable made the sale. It was the biggest single cash sale his dealership had ever made. He was polite. He was professional. He shook Thomas's hand. He nodded at Evelyn. He never mentioned the old Model A. He never acknowledged the hitch. He never said, "You were right, I was wrong." They kept the old tractor. They parked it in the barn. They used it for lighter work. It was more than a machine now. It was a symbol. It was the foundation. The expansion continued, year after year. 1980, another 120 acres, cash. 1982, a new, larger grain bin, cash. The Miller farm was no longer a small, struggling operation. It was a force, a model of efficiency and innovation. And all of it, was built on the back of a single, kind refusal. A gatekeeper who thought he was protecting them, but all he did was unleash something he could never have imagined. Evelyn Miller's quiet, unyielding will. The steel remembers. And so do the account books. So do the land deeds. So do the neighbors who watched it all happen. What happened next changed everything. It brought the story full circle. It brought Frank Gable back to the Miller's barn, not as a dealer, but as a witness. Which brings us back to 1985, to the barn. The young engineer, David, is looking at Frank Gable. The question hangs in the air. "You told us this was impossible." Frank looks at Evelyn. 23 years of unspoken history pass between them in a single glance. He sees the grandmother, but he also sees the young woman with fire in her eyes. The woman he erased from the conversation. The woman he told to stay home. He finally speaks. His voice is raspy. "I was trying to protect him." He gestures to Thomas. He had just lost his arm. "I didn't want him getting hurt again. I sold him what I thought was best," which was nothing. Evelyn steps forward. She is not angry. Her voice is calm. It is devastatingly quiet. "You weren't protecting him, Frank. You were limiting me. There's a difference." The engineer, David, looks back and forth between them. He realizes he has walked into the middle of a story he does not understand. A story that is not about steel and hydraulics. It's about dignity. He clears his throat. "Mrs. Miller, this design, it's revolutionary. In its simplicity. My company, we would like to buy the rights to it. We want to manufacture it. We think every small farmer with an old tractor should have one. We'd call it the Miller Link, and we would pay you a royalty on every unit sold." Evelyn looks at Thomas. Thomas puts his hand on her shoulder. He just nods. It was never about the money, but the recognition, that was something else. Frank Gable stood there, a ghost at a victory party. He had been so certain, so sure of his expertise, his kindness. And that certainty had cost his own company a decade of innovation. It had cost him the respect of this family. He had tried to be a good man. But being a good man and being a right man were not always the same thing. He finally looked Evelyn in the eye. "I was wrong. I am sorry." Just those 5 words. They had taken 23 years to arrive. Evelyn just nodded. She did not say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. But she did not say, "I told you so," because she didn't have to. The hitch said it for her. The farm said it for her. The quiet strength in her husband's eyes said it for her. That's not the end of the story, because a legacy is not what you build for yourself. It's what you build for others. The Miller Link hitch went into production the next year. It sold by the thousands. It kept thousands of small family farms in business. It allowed older farmers, or farmers with injuries, to keep working their land. The royalty checks started arriving in the Miller's mailbox. They were substantial. Evelyn didn't buy a new car. She didn't take a vacation. She went to the local community college. She met with the president. She established a scholarship. The Evelyn Miller Scholarship for Women in Agricultural Technology and Engineering. It was a full-ride scholarship, given every year to a young woman from a rural county who wanted to study mechanics, or engineering, or welding. The first recipient was a girl named Sarah Jenkins. Her father was a mechanic. She grew up in his shop. She went on to become a lead designer for Case IH. The next was Maria Flores, the daughter of migrant farm workers. She developed a new irrigation system that saved millions of gallons of water. The list went on, year after year, a legacy of women who were told, "Yes, you can," because Evelyn had been told, "No, you can't." The farm passed to her son and daughter. They expanded it further, using modern technology, GPS-guided tractors, computerized irrigation. But in the main barn, they kept the old Model A, the original Miller hitch still attached. It was never to be sold. It was the family's founding document, a constitution written in steel. Today, Evelyn's grandson Michael runs the farm. Sometimes, late at night, he goes out to the barn. He'll stand there in the quiet, looking at the old tractor. He'll run his hand over the hitch, over the thick, uneven welds his grandmother laid down in a single night of cold fury and brilliant creation. He touches the steel, and he remembers. The steel remembers. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is being told they can't. Someone is being limited. They are being told to stay home, to be safe, to let someone else handle it. And the person telling them this is not a villain. They are kind. They are well-meaning. They are certain they are right. They are protecting you. This story is proof that the most dangerous limitation is the one that comes disguised as kindness. It cannot be fought. It can only be disproven. With work, with persistence, with decades of quiet, unassailable success. If this story means something to you, if you've ever felt that quiet dismissal, subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories for the underestimated, for the innovators in the barn, for the quiet rebels. Comment below with your own story of being told no by someone who thought they were helping, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is standing in their own barn tonight, getting ready to strike an arc and prove everyone wrong.